This is my second attempt to reach Louisville and survive as a survivor. The biggest city in Project Zomboid has some unique points of interest, and conquering it is a challenge on its own. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this Project Zomboid experience. My spawn was Valley Station, not far from the military checkpoint in Louisville. A few days ago, the news reached everyone that a new illness, the Nox virus, had broken out and was infecting people through the air. Despite the military claiming that they had everything under control, Louisville fell. Time to take it back. In my house, I found a pencil and an eraser to document my story, and the keys for the car in front of the house. After making an improvised bag, I searched for a melee weapon, but no luck. While checking my car, I spotted a police barricade not far from my house. Maybe something useful for later. My own car didn't have any gas. Classic. After watching some TV in the morning, I checked the area around my house and found my first Zeds. I also stole the watch from one of them. He wouldn't need it anymore. After wiping out every neighbor I once knew, I picked up the plunger. Hopefully not for too long, before I found something better. And I could already tell I still needed some practice with killing Zeds. The group at the police barricade had wandered away, so I had time to check them out. Since my own car had no gas, the empty gas can was actually useful. After smashing the window of one of the cars, I found some shotgun shells and a shotgun. I mean, why not? But the 27 rounds were nowhere near enough to kill all the Zeds. That wasn't my plan anyway. My plan was to lure as many Zeds as possible away from the houses and toward the river. After running to the highway, I spotted a sign pointing toward a gas station. If I could just get enough gas to start my car, I could come back later and fill it up completely. After clearing the area, I refilled the gas can. Looking at the time, I decided to stay here for a while, watch some TV, refill my bottle, maybe find something to eat. I switched the TV channel and then did it with the Z laying on the floor. Thanks to my profession, I gained some extra carpentry experience and prepared some food in the kitchen. In one of the cupboards, I found an ice hockey still. Still not ideal, but definitely better than the plunger. I started walking back to my car. Since I'd made noise at the river, most of the Zeds were no longer nearby. I refilled the car, took the TV with me for the evening program, used the rest of the gas and drove to the gas station, and after that, to the warehouse. There, I hope to find some nails and more tools to take with me before entering Louisville through the hole in the fence. But first, it was time for the fishing show. After the episode, I grabbed some accession tools. A knife, a hatchet, wrenches, a hammer, a saw. and some nails, mainly for barricading windows and having option once the water shuts off. It was getting late, but I wanted to enter Louisville today. This time, I tried something different, driving through the hole with my car. After a few attempts squeezing through, I finally made it past the checkpoint and onto the highway. I turned right and entered the first residential area. I decided to spend the night in the first house on the corner. I was tired, and fighting the Zeds around the house was getting difficult. Inside, I closed all the curtains, set an alarm, and went to bed. I was in Louisville. The next morning, I experienced the horrors of Louisville. I could hear Zeds everywhere around the house. After catching the cooking show, I rushed outside again and saw the massive horde right next to the house. A house alarm was echoing through the street too, but I couldn't tell exactly which house it was coming from. My priority was the windows. As long as they were intact, I had a safe place to stay and plan my next moves. After a big sip of stew, I realized that the radio had the emergency broadcast frequency. Very nice. I was especially lucky to have 2 survivor homes right next to my current house. Before making my way further into town, I wanted to check them out. Survivor homes are really good places for weapons, magazines, books and food. But it wasn't that easy. There were still a lot of Zeds around. Some were still making their way toward my house. And a huge group was blocking the intersection. But I had an idea. If you can't fight them, lure them away. I drove to the other side of the area, honked and drove back to my house. The horde started moving. Back at the survivor homes, I fought the remaining Zeds. One of the Zeds even had a duffel bag, so I could finally replace my sheet bag. After fighting more Zeds, I spotted one with an even bigger backpack. I'm pretty sure he came from the survivor house, because the bag was filled with useful stuff. I switched bags and immediately became overloaded. I returned home and finally had some time to wash myself. I mean, look at me. And since it was 12 o'clock, I watched the final Woodcraft episode and reached carpentry level 3. So, now it was time to check out the survivor homes. Or not quite yet. There were still too many Zeds outside. After cleaning the nearby urns, I made my way inside. I found a new crowbar, some recycled magazines and more food. In the next house, I found my first gun, more magazines and a poncho. With a poncho, I wouldn't get soaked as quickly when it was raining. I could still work. There's always something to do in situations like this. I returned home, sorted my loot and went into the forest. With the logs laying around, I could turn them into planks and barricade my windows before nightfall. After watching the agriculture show, I finished barricading the windows and collected the corpses outside. But then I realized something. I still hadn't found any matches or lighters, so no fire for now. I read the magazines I found in the 2 survivor houses and went to bed. What a day. My morning started with the cooking show, and after reaching cooking level 2, I loaded everything I had gathered so far into my car. While standing in my kitchen and planning to cook, I realized something. The water had already shut off. That was unlucky. On day 3! I packed everything and drove off. My next goal was the small fire department. I dropped my backpack and started fighting. Fighting this many Zeds on day 3 was exhausting, but after retreating back to the fence, I could handle them. Still, I was completely out of breath. The doors were locked, so I tried to open one of the windows and those damn house alarms. I tried driving around and honking in different directions, hoping to lure most of the Zeds away from the fire department. It kind of worked, but I still had to fight. And hey, every dead Zed is one problem less in this world. After the fight was over, I entered the fire department and started moving my supplies from the car inside. There wasn't a single axe in the entire building. But hey, I found a new t-shirt. After putting the fresh food into the fridge, I went back outside to deal with the remaining Zeds. Many were coming from the residential area, and even more were coming from the shops. I was getting exhausted and tired, but the Zeds didn't stop. At 6 o'clock, I sat down and watched the fishing show. A good time for a break. After that, I walked around the fire department and tried to deal with the stragglers. But the exhaustion started to become a problem. My strength was fading. I sat down and started reading the Maintenance Volume 1 book and tried to stay quiet. But the Zeds kept coming toward me. After a risky fight right in front of my front door, I finally went to sleep. My first night in the fire department. After continuing with the cooking show, I prepared some breakfast and headed to the tool store. I picked up a lot of tools I didn't have yet, and I also needed a lot of nails. Since the water had already shut off, I needed a solution. My plan was to get roof access and build rain barrels. For that, I needed logs for the stairs and planks, nails and garbage bags for the barrels. I also read the Carpentry Volume 3 book I found earlier to level up faster. After reading half of the book, I built the stairs, prepared some dinner and used one of my axes to cut down a tree. The windows needed barricades as well. At around 11 PM, it was time to go to bed. My next step was getting garbage bags. From my previous run, I knew about the small store and the gas station down the road. I was sure I could find garbage bags there. But first, I had to deal with the remaining Zeds on the street. Clearing the street also gave me access to the hunting store. Because I had found the welding mess earlier, I could break in later. The small store still had some fresh fruit inside, although a lot of it already started to go bad. But the main goal was garbage bags. And I found them. After looting the store, I dismantled the metal shutters of the hunting store. But that was for later. First, I wanted to build some rain barrels. 3 barrels would be a good start. Now it was time for the hunting store. And this time I would use the car to transport the supplies. I found guns, ammunition and some useful magazines. I sorted the guns and the ammunition into their own crates, for one-handed and two-handed weapons. After that, I prepared some food with what I found in the store, read the magazines, washed myself with the remaining water in the sink and connected the rain barrels. Once it rained again, the barrels would fill up, and I could always build more. I was almost cooking level 3, so I could finally skip the daily early morning cooking show. I returned to the hunting store one more time because I forgot to bring a shotgun with me, mainly because of the wait the day before. Since I was already there, I started cleaning the gas station. A lot of Zeds were still there. But after clearing the smaller groups, I entered the store. I found more garbage bags, magazines and finally some matches. I could burn corpses now. I returned home, sorted my loot and went back to the gas station to refuel my car. Even though the water had already shut off, the power was still on. I still had things to do in my neighborhood. There were still a lot of Zeds around. But I wanted to wait until the fog cleared, so I started reading the Aiming Volume 1 book. And oi, there were a lot of Zeds. By using defense during the fight, I could control the situation. But there were still many Zeds left, despite all the killing today. I removed the curtains from one of the houses and added them to my own windows. Right now, Zeds could still see me from the street inside my home. And once the Zed sees you, it will find its way to you. The evening program was still running on TV, so I took a break at home after putting up the sheets. I returned to the houses to get more curtains and check the corpses for keys. And after some cooking late in the evening, I finally reached cooking level 3. I read for the rest of the evening and then went to bed. But tonight, I woke up from a nightmare. More reading for me then. After some breakfast, I went back to the houses. The Zeds just didn't stop coming. After killing the first ones, I found a new cool head. Very nice. I started looting the garages around the area. I didn't really know what I was looking for, but garages are always worth checking out. With some luck, I could find a generator for later. I found some tools, some books, and took the grill with me. Just a few houses further away, another massive fort was waiting for me. But first, I could check out these houses and maybe found something useful. And I found another rifle. Good. This cupboard had some really good loot overall. My bag was full, so I returned home before dealing with the group. One by one, I lured the Zeds to this corner of the fences and dealt with them. But I had the feeling that for every Zed I killed, 2 more were coming. After making sure I wasn't being followed anymore, I checked one of the garages and found a generator. Very nice. I put it on my roof, connected it, and refilled it. Because of the nightmare the previous night, I was already getting tired at around 2 PM. And on top of that, the helicopter showed up. Since I had cleared the surroundings over the previous days, I decided to stay home and hide. But the next day, I would have to deal with the Zeds the helicopter attracted. It started raining on day 8, but I still had to deal with the Zeds outside. Luckily, I found the poncho earlier on day 2. The fight began. After almost 3 hours of non-stop fighting, the streets were clear again. I sat down and started reading the Reloading Volume 1 book. I had a shotgun and plenty of rounds, and I wanted to clear the neighborhood for good. But before going out with my shotgun, I wanted to reach at least reloading level 1. The gun wouldn't jam as often with level 1. Since it kept raining, I stayed home and read, cooked some stews and then kept reading. I went up to the roof one more time to look around and I didn't see any Zeds nearby. I could sleep for now. The rain stopped. I grabbed my shotgun and all the rounds I had and started clearing the nearby streets. The fight was hard and long, but I felt confident. However, after some time, the streets didn't seem to clear out. I even got into a situation where I had maneuvered myself into a corner. Okay, I think I have a problem here. That was a close call. A little too close. After I used all my shotgun rounds, I went back and tried to kill the remaining stragglers with my crowbar, but that didn't go well. My arm was hurting badly from all the shotgun blasts. I went back to one of the intersections because I remembered seeing a Zed with a hockey mask and a machete. My two crowbars wouldn't last forever, and a machete would be a good alternative. I returned home completely exhausted, washed myself and read while resting. Since I didn't sleep very long the night before, I started getting tired. I cooked a new stew and read the Mechanics Volume 1 book before going to bed. On the next day, it was time to clear the streets again, but it seemed like many Zeds were gone, or dead. I had time to check out more garages. There were still a few stragglers inside the house, but the majority was gone. I found all kinds of useful stuff. Many seed packs, more food and some crafting materials. I continued looting more garages around the neighborhood. My crates were starting to fill up. With the whistle, I tried to lure more Zeds outside and into the streets. And I even found a Z with a satchel. Now I had a complete set of bags. I looted more garages and found 2 generators. I marked them on the map for now. There was one Z inside of one of the garages and I didn't want to risk jumping in blind, so both of us destroyed the door together. I was slowly finishing the garages nearby and took one of the better TVs with me. Since the Life and Living program had ended, I still had a lot of VHS tapes I could watch. With this better TV, I was able to watch them. I returned home, sorted my supplies, prepared some sandwiches and read until it got dark. Time for bed. I survived my first 10 days in Louisville. On day 11, I wanted to check out the neighborhood behind the shops. These houses were 2-story houses, with more space and more crates containing supplies. I started by killing the Zeds around the area and then checked out the van. The condition was okay. I was only missing the keys. Inside the house there was a party going on, but after leaving with the Zeds, I found the keys in one of the cupboards. The van didn't have any gas, but it had a lot of paint buckets. I knew exactly what I wanted to use them for, to collect water in addition to the barrels and then fill the barrels with the water from the buckets. I checked out more houses and garages before going back to the first house on the street. There were a lot of sets upstairs, but thanks to one of my mods I use, I could see the upstairs before going in. Around midday, I went back to my base, sorted my loot, mainly some food and crafting materials, grabbed the gas can and went back to the van. I filled it up and wanted to drive to the gas station, but then an ambulance was blocking the way, so I drove around the other side. I filled up the van and all my gas cans and drove back, but then I saw a black car in the parking lot and I remember that I picked up the keys for it earlier. I used one of the gas cans to put some fuel into the car, refueled it at the gas station and brought it back to my base. After that, I returned to the van. I now had 3 working cars at my base and 4 full gas cans. I poured out the paint and brought the buckets up to the roof. These buckets tend to fill up much faster than the barrels and I can transfer the water from the buckets into the barrels to fill them up faster. After some cooking, I read the rest of the evening and went to bed. The next day, I used the van to drive further into town. The horde from the shooting on day 9 was still around, but luckily far enough away to not bother me at my base. Since the power was still on and the TV was running without a program, I could watch some VHS tapes to level the first level of some skills. I heard about the addition of new VHS tapes, but didn't have the chance to search for and watch any of them yet. I drove past one of the bigger fire departments, because remember, I didn't have a single large axe, only small ones, but the amount of Zeds was too much for me at the time. I will return here later, that's for sure. I drove past the Grand Ohio Mall and reached the first VHS store. It was quiet here, so I could enter the store right away. Inside the store, I found what I was mainly looking for. One of the car zone tapes. With that and finishing the first skill book, I could reach mechanics level 2 just by watching the tape. Because I was already electronics level 1, I could hotwire cars in the future. I also found some exposure survival tapes and some of the new tapes for pottery and agriculture. I checked out the store next to it as well and took some whiskey with me. Maybe for some Molotovs later. I sat back in my car and drove to one of the other VHS stores. While driving to the residential areas, I spotted some survivor homes and marked them on the map. As well as small supermarkets and an animal trailer. I arrived at the other VHS store, but this time there were a lot of Zeds around. I tried to lure them away with the van. It kind of worked, but very slowly. After I found a chance to park near the store, I got out of the car and started clearing the remaining Zeds at the entrance. Once the area was clear, I went inside and found more VHS tapes I didn't have yet. Especially another car zone tape and some welding tapes. I was hyped for the welding tapes, because that meant I didn't have to dismantle car racks anymore for the early levels. What a relief. I stored the tapes on one of the shelves next to the TV and started with the car zone tape. Because I'd already read the first skill book, I instantly reached mechanics level 2. I cooked some soup and continued watching tapes. Now the first aid tape. And I gained a level in first aid. I think this is the first time ever that I actually leveled up first aid. With the exposure survival tape, I leveled fishing. Okay, these tapes are awesome. I went to bed because it was getting late, but I would continue watching these tapes the next day. Okay, it had to happen, right? I didn't press the record button, so I don't have the footage of me watching the rest of the exposure survival tapes. But I can tell you, I leveled trapping and foraging. Anyway, I spent the rest of the day reading the carpentry and mechanics books and watched the next car zone tape. I am a mechanics level 3 now. If I could get $1 for every time this happened. And all of this for the toilet water. I cooked a new soup, moved the billiard table, and connected the sink in the bathroom. I read the Welding Volume 1 book for the rest of the evening and then went to bed. Here I was, sitting and reading the rest of the Welding Volume 1 book. It was raining outside, so it was the perfect weather for staying inside and playing watching TV. The music only popped up once, but I still leveled up 2 skills in welding. Wow! In addition, I watched the pottery tape, another agriculture tape and the animal care tape. These changes to the VSS tapes brought VSS stores up to the same level as tool stores and gun stores, not gonna lie.
Nice.
I read more in the afternoon, cooked a new soup and went outside onto the roof. The buckets were full of water, so I transferred the water into the barrels. After reading for the rest of the evening, I dismantled the watches I had collected from the Zeds, leveled up 1 electronic skills and went to bed. Since it was still raining in the morning, I continued reading. But around 9 AM the rain stopped and I used my van to collect every log that was lying around. I collected 33 logs and sawed them into 99 planks. I sawed so many planks that I leveled up my carpentry skill. After some dinner, I went to bed. Carrying so much wood made me very tired. On day 16, I prepared some breakfast in the morning and then started building the wall for my compound. I didn't know yet how I wanted to design the entrance, so I left it open for now. By building the frames, I reached carpentry level 6. Carpentry level 6 was the key for the level 3 walls later on, but all the planks I had weren't enough, not even for the frames. I cooked another stew and got back to work. I was worried about my hatchet, because hatchets aren't great tools for cutting down a lot of trees. I carefully watched the condition of the handle and the head to take care of it, so it wouldn't break. That meant sharpening the head after every tree. I guess you have to do this in real life too. I managed to finish the frames and even had enough planks to build a chicken hutch. But that was enough work for today. In the evening I sat down, read and finished the Welding Volume 2 book. Time for bed. After an early sip of soup, I drove one of my cars to one of the nearby tool stores. I was slowly running out of nails, and I needed a lot of them to finish my wall. Unfortunately, the house alarm triggered once I entered the store. The door wasn't even locked. What is this? I sprinted inside and grabbed a box of nails. That wasn't enough, but I didn't want to risk getting swarmed by all the Zeds around the shop area. Since I couldn't loot the tool store, I decided to check out the supermarket I had marked before. The food wasn't anything special. I was hoping for food with a lot of calories, like butter or oil. I drove further to the animal trailer I had spotted before. It sounded like there were pigs inside the trailer, and a lot of Zeds were gathering around it. I tried to get the Zeds to follow me, drive around the block, and then approach again from the other side. There were too many Zeds for me to fight. I drove around the block, fought the Zeds until I was out of breath, returned to the car and repeated this whole process 2 or 3 times. Once the area was clear, I detached the car from the trailer and towed it away. Man, towing really sucks in Build 42. I had a really hard time moving the trailer away from the spot. And yeah, I know about the tire pressure and that my car didn't have enough horsepower to tow the trailer properly, but it was just annoying, especially because a lot of Zeds were following me again. I quit the game for a moment and activated a mod for better towing. Now towing worked like it did back in Build 41. I fought the remaining Zeds, but my situation got worse. I was highly exhausted and thirsty. I ran to my car and drove off, and I could tow the trailer. Very nice. Do you see how the trailer is slightly moving forward? Yeah, this behavior won't stop, even without a mod. I brought the pigs inside and cut down another tree for some throws. The pigs had food and water now. I washed myself in the evening, inflated the tires of my cars and tried to attach the trailer again. But that was more difficult than expected. And I had some fans watching me do it. I gave up for today and wanted to try it again the next day. I managed to attach the trailer the next day and drove to the south of town. To the farms. I was lucky, the cows were still alive. But I had some problems towing this trailer. I killed the Zeds around the chicken hutch and grabbed 3 chickens and a throw. 1 male and 2 females. Then I returned for the cows with some rope. I wanted a Holstein cow and a bull, so I would be able to harvest milk and make butter from it. With that, I would be able to maintain my weight. It was already evening when every animal was at my base, so I made some dinner, refilled the barrels because it was raining, took a short break, chopped down a tree and built a fence to separate the chickens from the pigs and cows. I also wanted to build a small airlock, so an animal wouldn't accidentally walk into my garage, but I didn't have enough wood for the gate. That would be for tomorrow. Good night. I cut down more trees, built the airlock gate and continued building the wall. My hatchet was actually holding up, but that was because I sharpened it immediately whenever it lost some sharpness. Wood wasn't a problem anymore. I was running out of nails and I had to return to the tool store once again. After petting my animals, I cooked some dinner, read for the rest of the evening and then went to bed. The next day, I heard my pigs screaming. Zeds were still coming to my fence. A small group was lingering across the street, so I dealt with them. With my remaining nails, I built up as many walls I could. I read another skill book while waiting for the fog to clear, before going back to my car and driving to the tool store again. What I like to do in open areas with a lot of sets is to pull most of them in one direction, away from the place I want to visit. I achieved this by driving around in circuits and luring the Zeds by passing close to them over and over again. I drove around the Gigamart like 10 times. Once the Zeds were pulled away from the store, I entered and looted the boxes of nails. I didn't need a lot of them to finish my compound, and I had a small window to get inside, loot and leave again. That's why I left after looting 2 boxes. I refueled my car after driving around the parking lot and continued gathering logs and building the rest of the wall. I built the big gate and saw the rest of the logs, just to realize that I was short on logs again. I was too tired to cut down another tree. If there were any surprise sets, I couldn't fight them properly without risking everything. I stayed inside my base, cooked a new soup and went to bed. On day 21, I woke up with the new hairstyle. How disgusting. Anyway, I cut down the trees I needed and finished the wall. My compound was finished. I was safe in my base. Look at my fort! Since I had planks left over, I built a better rain barrel, finished the Electronics Volume 2 book, petted my animals and filled their throats with freshly cut grass. I looked at the map and saw 2 houses right next to me that I hadn't marked yet. I looted them and returned to my base. I love the feeling in Project Zomboid once the walls of your base are finished, sitting inside while it was raining and reading a book. That's my safe space. I continued reading and went to bed. I survived for 3 weeks now in Louisville. Now that my base is finished and I have finally settled in, it's time to focus on the real reason I came to Louisville. There are plenty of great base locations in the city, but one stood out to me the moment I saw that scene in The Last of Us Part 2. When Abby explores her community, it's revealed that her group has turned a stadium into their home. And Project Zomboid has a stadium too. So, here's the plan for this series. Transform Louisville's baseball stadium into my permanent base and survive there for good. To make that happen, I will need to prepare first. Besides building up the solid supplies of weapons, I need plenty of materials and tools for crafting and construction, as well as the skills required to conquer and transform the stadium. I have already completed a few of these objectives, but there's still a long list ahead of me. It was day 22, and because the VHS tapes had been so useful in the last episode, I decided to check out the last 2 VHS stores I hadn't visited in Louisville yet. I had to drive downtown, and the number of Zs were staggering. The isometric view of Project Zomboid was also showing its flaws. Between the skyscrapers, it was almost impossible to anticipate how many Zs were waiting around the next corner. It was crowded everywhere. I could forget about the first store. There were simply too many Zs around. But the second one was much quieter. I killed the Zs outside and entered the store. Once again, I found a lot of new VHS tapes, although I didn't really know which one to take. I grabbed the ones that sounded promising, or were related to one of the game's skills. VHS tapes, done. I didn't want to spend 1 second longer downtown, so I left the store and drove home. On the way, I marked another survivor house on the map to come back later. I didn't know it yet, but that house contained some very spicy loot. The horde from the previous episode was slowly moving onto the road I always used to drive into town. I would have to deal with that horde, sooner or later. Back at base, I sat down and watched the tapes. I leveled welding, knapping and first aid again. I petted my animals, collected some eggs from the chicken hutch, cleaned it and was just about to cook when I spotted Zs approaching my fence. They were definitely coming from the horde up the road, so I would have to deal with it even sooner than I expected. The Zs had even returned to the houses that were once safe. It was getting late. I went back inside, read for a while, and then went to bed. Some of my quality of life mods were working again, and both of my crowbars were in a terrible condition. Luckily, I had a machete. Since I didn't want to use one of my whetstones every time it got dull, and I just had finished the first masonry book, I decided to craft a grindstone. For that, I needed a stone wheel. I turned a large stone into small stones, then the small stones into stone blocks until I reached masonry level 2, and finally crafted the second large stone into a stone wheel. With that, I was ready to build a grindstone. I switched to the machete and returned to the horde. The killing began. The machete was awesome, but I didn't like having to sharpen it every now and then, so I wanted to find a better solution. And I already had something in mind. I managed to reach long braid level 1, before retreating because of exhaustion. On my way home, I picked up logs I'd gathered earlier and brought them back to my base. Time to wash myself. As usual, I petted my animals, inflated the tires of my cars again and headed back out. Since the entrance of the gated community was now clear, I wanted to check if there are any survivor homes inside. Survivor homes are a very good place to find guns, books and supplies you need to survive. And I got lucky. One of the first houses was a survivor home. Then I found a second one too. Very nice. I also came across a broken down car with a jack I didn't have yet. I could finally change tires now. I left through the other exit and returned home. The survivor homes would have to wait until the next day. I read for the rest of the evening and then went to bed. I drove to the first survivor home and started clearing the Zs around it. There were a lot of them, but with the fence and no long blade level 1, I secured the area. Inside, I found some new recipes, guns, a new machete and more food. I returned home for a short break to empty my bags, then headed to the second survivor home in the gated community. I parked the car a little farther away and cleared the Zs first. After that, I checked the construction van. There's always a small chance for finding a sledgehammer inside, but not this time. I killed a few more Zs before entering the house. Inside, I found plenty of food, some new books and more ammunition. As I was leaving the gated community, I saw the massive horde still waiting for a car to drive by. Aye. I stopped for a moment to deal with the Zs that had followed me. But I was getting exhausted and I had to leave again. Okay, I will deal with this horde, I promise. Back at base, I read all the new magazines I'd found in the survivor homes and took a short break. Then I returned to the street to kill the Zs that had followed my car. Once again, I was out of breath after the fight, but the machete was holding up really well. I went home, washed myself and realized it was the 1st of August. I planted some crops that could grow through the winter, watered them and then went to bed. Since I had started looting survivor homes, I wanted to check out the ones I had marked on the map as well. On the way to the first one, I spotted another survivor home right next to it. I was hoping to find more melee weapons, since my machetes were starting to lose durability too. After clearing the first group of Zeds, I made my way into the first house, killed the Zeds inside, and then returned to the car for a short break. I was completely exhausted again. While recovering, I sharpened my machete before heading back inside. I found another bunch of magazines, but no new melee weapons. Then I moved on to the second house, hoping that the large groups farther down the road hadn't noticed me. I killed the Zeds inside and looted the place. Once again, I found plenty of magazines, but still no new melee weapons. I left the house at just the right moment, rushed back to my car, crossed both houses off my map and drove home. Back at base, I sorted my loot, watched the electronic tape and reached level 3. After that, I read all the new magazines. Then it was the usual routine, petting the animals, cleaning the chicken hutch and reading until it got dark. Time for bed. On day 26, I re-equipped the last machete I had. While cooking breakfast, the power went out. On day 26, the water had shut off on day 3, and now the power was gone on day 26. That was both very lucky and very unlucky at the same time. Luckily, I had prepared for this. The generator was already on the roof, and I had finished cooking the stew. I opened the curtains and turned the generator on, so the fridge could keep my food fresh. I grabbed my van and drove to the garages where I had left the generators. I picked up the first one and headed to the gas station to hook it up to the pumps. Maybe you remember that I said Louisville has a lot of great points of interest. One of them is the baseball factory in the north of town. That was my destination today. I wanted to loot some baseball bats. One of the trades I had picked was Brawler, so I wanted to focus on long blunt weapons anyway. I drove past the horde, through downtown, past the fire department and finally reached the factory. I lured the Zeds away with my van before starting the fight. Again and again, I drove in circles to pull most of them away before parking in front of the garages and dealing with the remaining Zeds. Unfortunately, the garage doors were locked. I had to find another way inside. After fighting the first few Zeds around the corner, I backed off and used the van once more to lure them away. It worked, so I approached the factory from the other side. But those doors were locked too. Luckily, the Zeds inside broke one of them down, giving me a way in. One of the storage room doors was actually not locked, so I could enter. And there they were, my precious baseball bats. I grabbed 10 bats before retreating and driving back home. But don't you worry, I wasn't planning to use them as they were. No. I was going to turn them into beasts. The new crafting system in Build 42 lets you do some fantastic things, like reinforcing baseball bats with sheet metal. And so, say hello to one of the best weapons in the game, in my opinion, the sheet metal reinforced bat. I was ready. I petted my animals, read for the rest of the evening, and then went to bed. It had been a very productive day. After some breakfast in the morning, I grabbed my shotgun shells and drove to the halt on the street. Enjoy the montage. After going through all my shells and ammunition, I switched to the baseball bat. I got back into my car and drove to the parked fire truck nearby. I lured the groups away before getting out and dealing with the remaining stragglers. The key was still in the ignition, but the truck didn't have any gas. I towed it back to my base, filled it with a gas can, refueled it at the gas station and parked it at my base. After that, I petted my animals, had some dinner, read for the rest of the evening and then went to bed. On day 28, I decided to check out the other survivor homes I had marked on the map. I cleared the Zeds around the first house. And while preparing to go in, the door had been broken down, so I could walk right in. Inside, I found exactly what I was hoping for. A sledgehammer. Very nice. I could finally start transforming structures. I also found a really cool looking bandana. I crossed the house off my map and headed straight home. I already had a plan for the sledgehammer. There was a sink in my garage and now I could extend the roof with a few floor of tiles to place rain barrels above it. That meant I now had 3 plumbed 6. I went back outside and collected a few more logs to build the remaining barrels. The nice thing about the new roof was also that it provided shelter for my animals, so they wouldn't get as stressed when it rained. In the evening, I once again petted my animals, read for a while, and then went to bed. After a morning shower, I got into my new fire truck and drove back to the tool store. I still hadn't looted the place completely, and now that I had a good supply of baseball bats, I could deal with a group outside. There weren't that many left, but still enough to keep me busy. Inside, I found a few more seed packets and some additional boxes of nails. This is exactly how people get killed. Those crawlers hit boxes. I drove home, sorted my supplies and headed back to the shopping area. This time I explored the residential neighborhood just south of it. I wanted to see if there were any more survivor homes. And there were! At first the area looked safe, but then the Zeds started coming. I found some more useful loot and crossed the house off the map. There was another survivor home nearby. Once again, I cleared the Zeds around it. Removed the barricade from the window and climbed inside. I was slowly reaching the point where I had found most of the magazines in the game. Still, a few were missing. I drove back home, sorted my loot, petted my animals, cleaned the chicken hutch, moved the storage container into the garage, read for the rest of the evening, and then went to bed. On day 30, it started to rain, but thanks to my poncho, the rain was manageable. With the sledgehammer in my hands, I could finally start looting places that are harder to get into, like police stations. They usually have a small gun room locked behind the security door, but with a sledgehammer, I could simply go around it. Inside, I found more shotgun shells and additional magazines for both of my pistols. Since the grocery store was right next to it, I looted it as well. With the milk I found there, I could make butter. I returned home and started reading the magazines while it rained. The rain didn't stop until the evening, so I had plenty of time to read. Once it cleared up, I petted my animals, cooked the rest of the fresh fruit into stews and stored them into the fridge. I was slowly working my way through all my perishable food. I read for the rest of the evening before going to bed. I had survived 1 month in Louisville. It was day 31 and I decided to finally get rid of the fireman's pole. With the sledgehammer I found in the last episode, this wasn't a problem. I placed some crates over the hole in the floor, had some breakfast and got into my car. My next goal was the university library. I needed more books to complete my collection, and this library had 5 floors filled with nothing but books. I drove a few laps around the building before parking near the entrance. I dealt with the Zeds outside, smashed one of the windows and went inside. I found the books I was looking for, along with even more magazines. I was really surprised by how many magazines I was still missing. After checking every bookshelf, I returned home. Sorted the books into the crate and listened to the weather report. No rain tomorrow.
Nice.
I petted my animals, then read all the magazines I had found that day. Then the sun set and it became too dark to read. I went to bed. Books and skill tab done. The next morning, I continued reading the magazines before getting back into my car. I drove back to my first neighborhood in Louisville, almost 1 month later. I remembered spotting a survivor home that I hadn't looted yet. But to be honest, when I started editing the series, I realized that I actually missed this house earlier. But now, I was finally here. I drove to the edge of the neighborhood, used my horn to lure most of the Zeds away, and then returned to the house. I killed the Zeds around it and made my way inside. I found some Longblade skill books and a little more food. I marked the house off my map and drove to the neighborhood just north of it. There, I spotted another survivor home and decided to loot it right away. Once again, I killed the Zeds around the house, made my way inside, and found even more food before returning home, sorting my loot and petting my animals. After that, I went to bed. I was slowly getting everything ready for the baseball stadium, but there was one more thing I needed before I could move on. Access. To transform the stadium, I would need a lot of wood, and to gather that wood efficiently, I needed better access. Since I hadn't found any at my fire department, I wanted to check out the large fire department near the mall. I grabbed my shotgun and pistols, loaded every magazine I had, and drove off. I parked near the fire department and started blasting. But it wasn't enough. I had to retreat home. It was getting late and I was getting tired. And I had run out of ammunition in my backpack. That evening, I reloaded all my magazines, petted my animals, even gained a level in animal care, and then went to bed. The next day, I returned to the fire department. Every pistol magazine was fully loaded and I was ready. I killed a few Zeds that had followed me onto the street and then drove on. Since I always passed by this area, I decided to take the other road around and see if I could find any survivor homes. And I found one. Amazing. I entered the house through the back and killed a few Zeds inside. I found some useful supplies, but most importantly, 2 toy planes. After arriving back at the fire department, I started shooting again. There were still a lot of Zeds left. And after 2 days of fighting, I could finally enter the other fire department. Inside, I changed t-shirts once again and finally found my axes. Wonderful. I returned home and could finally check axes off my list. I was ready for the baseball stadium, but before I started clearing the stadium, I wanted to set up a temporary base nearby, a place where I could rest, eat and sleep. I ended the day by sorting my loot, petting my animals, reading for a while and then going to bed. On day 35, I first reloaded all my magazines, read for a bit, cleaned up after my animals and was ready to go when I realized I wanted a few more reinforced baseball bats. I was missing some nuts and bolts, so I drove off to one of the warehouses in Louisville. I didn't have to kill a single Zed and quickly found my materials I needed for crafting. I returned home and crafted 2 more reinforced sheet metal baseball bats. Okay, now I was ready. I petted my animals and went to bed. Day 36 started with a storm, and I finished the first blacksmithing book. I packed my bags with tools and building materials, a fresh set of clothes, some medical supplies and weapons. For food, I took the good stuff with me. Cereal bars, and cans of chili and spaghetti bolognese. I read for the rest of the evening and then went to bed. The next morning, I cooked some breakfast, grabbed my bags and loaded them into my trunk. My goal was a small gated community with villas near the stadium. The area was crowded, but after a month in this hell, I knew how to fight. I had become a beast with the baseball bat. But I still had to manage my endurance, so after killing the first group of Z, I sat in my car to recover and drove a lap around the area. Then the fight against the second group began. I repeated the lap again, but it felt like the number of Zs wasn't going down at all. The third time, I parked my car in an unfortunate spot. I was slowly becoming exhausted, and there were still plenty of Zs around. Eventually, the exhaustion got the better of me and I couldn't make it back to my car. I needed a place to rest. I tried to lose the Zs by running through the houses, but there were a few waiting in the backyards as well. Then I spotted an open door and ran upstairs. I sat down on the bed and waited. If I got spotted here, I would have a serious problem. Luckily, I wasn't. The fighting continued, and just look at the number of Zs around my car, and at all the bodies on the ground. But the area finally seemed to be clear. There were still Zs inside the house I had chosen to stay in. I tried to lure them outside, but one of them broke the upstairs window. That's not very kind. And another one was hiding in the conservatory. The house was finally clear, and I started moving my bags inside. My next steps would be to secure the area with a wall and burn all the corpses inside the compound. I returned to my fire department one more time. I still needed a few things. First, door hinges and doorknobs. I wanted to build 2 large gates, and I also took the generator that are still sitting in one of the garages. Since I was already very tired, I decided to stay here for the night, pet my animals, read for a bit, and then go to bed. This area was, of course, much quieter than downtown. I had my axe and some rope, so I cut down a few trees and brought the logs back with me. I needed quite a few logs for the wall, the gates and the rainwater setup. I drove back to the villas, unloaded the logs, and killed the few Zeds that had followed me. I sawed the logs into planks and started building. I could have built the wall further down the road, but I wanted to be able to see it from my house and eventually hear any Zed banging against the wall or the gate. I finished the wall on one side and used the leftover planks to barricade the broken windows. I removed the window from the neighboring house and installed it in the kitchen. Then I cleaned the house of all the trash scattered around and went to sleep in my new home. It was day 39. I got into my car and drove to the edge of the city near the large fire department. Since I had already cleared that area, I had the chance to cut down more trees for logs. I returned to my new base and killed a few Zeds wandering around. Then I dealt with the ones on the other side of my compound. After that, I finished the wall. Next, I built the stairs and the platform for the rain barrels. After that, I wanted to get rid of the bodies and try to put them into the trunk, but I couldn't. More dragging for me then. Dragging, reading and repeating. I had a lot of bodies to burn. Completely exhausted and tired, I went to bed. The entire next day, I dragged the bodies inside my compound into the campfire. I had to take a break after a few bodies so I wouldn't collapse. But after 2 fires, the bodies were finally gone. I moved the campfire to the second pile and dragged the bodies in front of the gate into the flames. Then I read for the rest of the evening and went to bed quite early. I was exhausted from dragging corpses around all day. Before liberating the stadium, I wanted to secure my compound for good. At the very least, I could check the houses inside my walls and maybe kill any Zed that are still hiding inside. I wasn't expecting to find anything special, but damn! Look at this head! After checking the first house, a few Zeds started gathering in front of my wall. There was definitely a lot more going on in this area than back at my fire department, I can tell you that. I killed the Zeds around the houses behind the one I was staying in. Then dragged a few more bodies into the newly placed campfire. At least the entrance by the gate was clear now. I took a short break to read, then continued looting the houses. The interiors of these villas looked awesome. I finished searching the houses, marked them off my map, and washed myself in the bathtub of the last one. I read for the rest of the evening, built one last fence with the planks I found in the houses, and reached carpentry level 8. After a bit more reading, I went to bed. The liberation of the stadium could finally begin. And what a liberation it was. The clearing of the area began on day 42. It was raining, so I put on my poncho and headed toward the stadium. At first on foot. I also wanted to keep the streets clear, but I quickly realized just how many Zeds were roaming the surrounding area. So I abandoned the baseball bat strategy, drove back home, grabbed my guns and ammunition. Of course, after petting my animals first. Then I drove back and started shooting. And for the next 10 in-game days, almost every day looked the same. Reloading my magazines in the evening, parking near the stadium and clearing the streets. The roads were filled with corpses, but I kept going. I even tried some new weapons, like one of the new carbines. I would drive through the stadium, lure the Zeds outside, and shoot as many as I possibly could. Then run back to my car and drive a little further down the street. Once I ran out of ammunition, I switched to my baseball bat to deal with the lonely stragglers. But because I felt like that would take a while, I drove to one of the gun stores in Louisville. Broke in through the back of the building and looted the place completely. This was on day 46. I used pistols, my shotgun, the carbine. Everything I had. Without even entering the stadium. And it still felt like more Zeds kept pouring out of it. Every evening, I reloaded my magazines at home, went to sleep, and returned to the stadium the next morning. I wanted to clear not only the stadium itself, but also the entire area around it. Shooting, reloading, retreating with the car. And then more shooting. On day 50, I drove to the army supply store. Once again, I had run out of ammunition. I used my usual tactic to lure most of the Zeds away from the shop and toward the river by driving in circles over and over again while using the horn. Slowly, the horde moved away, and I was able to enter the store. I killed a few remaining stragglers, smashed my way inside with the sledgehammer, and looted everything. I took the ammunition for my pistols, shotgun and carbine. After reloading everything, I drove back to the parking lot and walked toward the entrance. Just look at the street, and I still hadn't even entered the stadium. At the parking lot, I got my first glimpse of the stadium before retreating and moving to the other side. I drove home again, reloaded everything and returned to the stadium the next day. I had seriously underestimated how many Zeds were inside and around the stadium. It felt like they would never stop coming. More and more kept pouring out of the surrounding buildings. But during one of my trips, I finally had the chance to loot the last VHS store in Louisville. Inside, I found a few VHS tapes that looked like they were for tailoring, but I would find out later. I drove around the stadium again, and there were still countless sets left. I returned home, reloaded and drove back to the parking lot. There was nothing else I could do. I entered the main entrance once again, before retreating. The hall was dark, cold and a complete death trap. I needed to clear both the outside and the inside. Suddenly, another huge group of Zeds poured out of one of the buildings that I thought would have been empty by now. I was wrong. Once again, I fired every last bullet I had before retreating. On the way home, I stopped by the farming store to check out the cabbages. They were ready to harvest. I harvested 46 cabbages. I could definitely make quite a few stews with those, but then it was back to shooting. Just when I thought one side of the stadium was finally clear, even more Zeds came pouring out. After dealing with them, I kept driving around and slowly started to feel like I had cleared most of the Zeds outside and on the ground floor. Yes, you heard that correctly, on the ground floor. Because indoor Zeds only spawn once you're close to the building, or at least one floor above or below them, and the stadium had 2 floors. But on the evening on day 55, I finally stepped onto the field. Almost 2 in-game weeks later, I saw the field inside the stadium. On day 56, I returned to the fire department. I collected a lot of jars earlier, to be able to preserve food. In this case, the cabbages. There was no way I could eat all of them before they spoiled. I also grabbed some building materials, like nails and sheet metal. My plan was to seal off the other entrances to the stadium and only use the one at the main parking lot. This time, I took the van with me and left the fire truck at the fire department. I drove to the forest, cut down a few trees and gathered enough logs for more planks. Then I returned to my villa and waited for the storm to calm down. I read for the rest of the evening and then went to bed. The next day, I started sealing the entrances to the stadium. First, I removed the door frames. Then I built wooden frames and reinforced them with sheet metal. I had already collected the metal sheets and my welding equipment. But I quickly ran out of welding rods, so for now I could only build the frames. I closed off all the doorways and checked out the tool store downtown. But no welding rods for me here. I demolished a few small walls near one of the entrances so I could drive a car onto the field. I parked in one of the corners and unloaded the logs and the tarp. That would be for later. I hadn't realized that the van was in a pretty bad condition too, so I switched cars once again at the fire department. I also picked up more sheet metal for the walls. Now all I needed were welding rods. But that would have waited until tomorrow. I cooked the jars, prepared a new stew and went to bed. I needed these welding rods to finish the construction work at the baseball stadium. And my next best guess was one of the warehouses. There were a few warehouses in Louisville, but there was also one in Raleigh Station, where I started this run. Since I hadn't seen any clay deposits along the river downtown, I also grabbed a few sacks to collect some clay. I remembered seeing plenty of it on my first day in Raleigh Station. I took the sledgehammer with me and drove to the railroad tracks to leave Louisville. It was a little annoying how many Zeds were gathered around the tracks, so I had to clear the fence before I could make my way through. I drove to the warehouse and searched the crates. I actually found only a single welding rod, so I had to check out the other warehouse as well. I drove to the river in Raleigh Station, passing the house where I had spawned. I collected around 100 units of clay. Before driving back to Louisville and heading to the second warehouse. This time, a few Zeds were lingering around the entrance. I found some welding rods, definitely enough to finish the walls, and drove back to the stadium. The first corpses had already started disappearing, making it much easier to dive through the area, but there were still plenty of bodies laying on the street. I seed every entrance to the stadium. Drove inside and picked up the logs I had left there earlier. I used them to build the remaining walls and the gate. The stadium was finally secured, or at least every way in and out was. It was already very late by the time I had finished the last wall, so I drove home and went to bed. The next morning I returned to the stadium to explore the interior. It was my first time ever being inside the stadium. I found a room full of baseball bats. That's good to know. I checked the rooms and the bathrooms. You can tell me whatever you want, but this is a horror game. The ground floor itself wasn't that exciting, just a few locker rooms and some fast food restaurants. And there were still Zeds inside. I made my way around the ground floor before heading up to the first and second floors. As you can see, this one restaurant really had a lot of employees. I dealt with the Zeds, and then continued exploring and took a short break at one of the stands. But my break didn't last long. A large group of Zeds came pouring out of one of the bathrooms on this floor. And since one of the restaurants had been packed with Zeds, I figured that the second one would be too. I was right. Now that I was on the second floor, the Zeds and the loungers upstairs started spawning in. From the field, I could finally look inside the loungers and be able to see the Zeds. But it was getting late, and I didn't want to continue the fight. So I backed off, drove home, and ended the day by reading, and then went to bed. On day 60, I grabbed a few magazines once again. I thought they might help, and I was right. The Zeds smashed the windows of the lounges and wandered out onto the field. Bringing the gun had definitely been a right decision. Even then, I still didn't have enough ammunition for all of them, so I had to switch back to the baseball bat. And I thought I was slowly getting close to liberating the stadium. I drove around the field and honked the horn once again. Maybe the few Zeds still hiding inside the stadium would hear it and come outside. And they did. The number of Zeds was devastating. This had to end eventually, right? After making so much noise inside the stadium, I started to worry that I had attracted Zeds from the outside as well. Not wanting to lose my newly built metal walls right away, I drove around the stadium, indeed with the few Zeds outside. Luckily, most of the ones surrounding the stadium were already dead. I drove back inside and headed upstairs. My flashlight was shaking as I could still hear a lot of noise coming from one of the lounges. I mean, how bad could it be? Pretty bad. There was no chance I could fight that many Zeds inside. So I ran back outside and continued the fight there. I was standing on the stage with my long blunt weapon where I could basically one-hit most of the Zeds. And after clearing this last lounge, I reached kill count 6,000. I started clearing the stadium at around 2,000 kills, just to give you some perspective. But it seemed like this was finally it. I drove around the stadium one more time and killed another group of Zeds. And then I noticed that one of my barricades had been destroyed. But that was okay. I had some spare materials and could build a new one. I checked the area around the hole and luckily found a Lutex watch on one of the corpses. I closed the hole and drove back inside. I checked every lounge upstairs in the stadium to make sure that all rooms on both sides were clear. The stadium seemed liberated. This fight had taken almost 20 in-game days, but I had finally achieved my goal. However, with all the corpses lying around, there was no way I could move in right away. So I drove back to my villa and took everything with me. The space had served its purpose. I wanted to return to my fire department and wait until all the corpses disappeared. With the standard settings, that would take around 9 days. That was okay. I could read every book I had while I waited. I returned to the fire department, washed myself after the long and exhausting fight, and went to bed. Day 61 began with cooking a stew, followed by petting my animals. Then I started reading through my book collection, beginning with the reloading book. I had brought the VHS tapes from the last store with me and leveled Tailoring. I had every tailoring book except the first one, so I only gained the first level. I continued reading until it got too dark and then went to bed. The next morning I woke up nice and early, baked some bread and made myself a few sandwiches. I was losing weight and bread with butter and oil was an easy way to gain it back. I finished the welding book and then went outside to cut down some trees. I would need a lot of wood to start building everything at the stadium. I petted my animals, checked my crops, filled the barrels with water from the buckets and continued reading the final carpentry book. After waking up, I petted my animals, had some breakfast and continued reading. I finished the carpentry book in the late afternoon. And I can show you something. I found an M16 rifle in the army supply store, along with 2 magazines. Let's have some fun with this rifle later. After reloading the magazines, I grabbed the next trapping book and continued reading until it got too dark. Around midday the next day, I finished that book as well and continued with the first aid book. It got too dark to finish that one as well, so I went to bed. But after 4 days of reading, I had no more books left that I could read. After looting the library, I had almost every book in the game, but I was still missing some of the lower level skill books. And the best places to find those are schools. There was a school not far from me, so I went there. The rain was heavy, but I broke into the library and found several skill books I didn't have yet. I still didn't find every book I was missing, for example the first carving book, but I had more books to read now. I returned home, finished the first aid book and continued with the cooking book. The storm was still going, so it was the perfect time to stay inside and read. Since I had spent the entire day sitting inside and reading, I wasn't tired at all by the late evening, so I took some sleeping pills and went to bed. After the cooking book came the masonry book, but then the rain stopped for a moment. I went outside to pet my animals and collect the eggs from the hutch. The rain continued, and so did my reading. The next book was the pottery book. And in the evening, I took some sleeping pills again. I noted that I actually had a pair of reading glasses, so I tried them the next day. And yes, the rumors are true. Reading is faster with them. I managed to finish the pottery book in a single day. That gave me enough time to cook some omelets, pet my animals, and continue reading the agriculture book. Thanks to the glasses, I finished that book around midday the next day, and once again, I had no more books left to read. However, I was almost level 2 in tailoring, so I ripped up some sheets and added padding to one of my coats. After a while, I reached tailoring level 2 and had another book to read. It was day 68 now, 8 days since I had returned from the stadium. I spent the rest of the day reading and then went to bed. The next day, I finished the tailoring book and started reading the last book I could still read, the glassmaking book. Making glass was a skill I probably wouldn't need here in the biggest city on the map. But hey, all these arrows on the skill tab were looking pretty nice. I prepared everything to return to the stadium the next day by grabbing extra weapons and food. Then I waited for bedtime and tried to think if I was missing anything for my first trip back to the stadium. I guess we will find out tomorrow. I went to bed. I woke up very early on day 70, but now it was finally time to move into the stadium and transform it into my new base. My trunk was full, so I returned to the stadium. And just look how clean the streets are. Beautiful. I drove around to check if there were still any Zeds nearby. Only a few were still running around the residential area and the school. The skeletons from the last fight were still laying on the ground, but overall, I had waited long enough. I went inside and checked the stadium once again. I could still hear a few Zeds. But that was it. Except for some that were apparently inside the walls on the second floor. As long as they stay there and this won't happen.
They're in the walls.
I returned to the car and started building the stairs. I wanted to move into one of the lounges on the second floor. But since the inside of the stadium was dark and still pretty scary, I wanted to build a shortcut across the roof. With the walk to option, you can check whether a rooftop is actually walkable. If the option is green, you should be safe to walk there. After building the second staircase, I grabbed a sledgehammer and destroyed part of one of the walls to create a doorway. I built a few fences for safety and closed off the lounge with the doors. I removed the broken glass and barricaded the window with planks. Then I drove to the houses next to the stadium and grabbed a bed. This wouldn't be my bed forever, but it would be good enough for the first few nights. I also found a keyring with a rubber duck. What a cool item! I immediately replaced my old keyring with it. I placed the bed and built this third staircase to access the roof. I had a lot of tarps and wanted to use them to build rain barrels so I could have access to fresh water. Building these stairs also brought me to carpentry level 10. I removed the chairs and moved the counters and the fridge to the other side of the room. The kitchen had to be close to the windows so I could get some natural light inside. Tonight, I spent my first night in the baseball stadium. And I woke up to an amazing view. I had a lot of work ahead of me. Since I now knew where my sink would be, I built my first rain barrel and plumbed to the sink. It was raining, so that was convenient. The room was big enough for me to move the furniture around and try out different layouts. But I needed more furniture, especially an oven and a new generator. I drove back to the house and grabbed an oven and a bookshelf. Then I started moving my stuff from the trunk into my new home. First the food, some cooking supplies and a few weapons, tools and materials. The satellite dish was in the way, so I tried to destroy it with my sledgehammer. But that wasn't possible. I couldn't remove the tiles. I drove back to the villa to get the rest of my things, but first I stopped at the American Tire. The reason I hadn't replaced the front window of my car was that I was missing the knowledge required for heavy vehicles. Inside the store, I found the magazine I was looking for, and it was marked as unwanted. That's a shame, but mistakes happen. I grabbed the rest of my loot from the villa, along with the generator, and drove back. I also stopped at the farmer market again and took the rain barrels with me. That would save me a lot of wood later. I also grabbed an extra chair so I could sit down while cooking. I placed the rain barrels on the roof and built another one using the tarp I had. The sink was now connected to 6 large rain barrels. I connected the generator and brought the rest of my loot upstairs. Then I read the magazine and finally grabbed a beer to relax for the first time doing this run. I had liberated the stadium and was finally about to move in. This beer was well deserved. My next plan was to let more light into the area where I was staying. So I got into my car, drove back to the forest and chopped down some more trees. I also drove to the nearby houses and removed a few windows. My plan was to destroy parts of the walls, build window frames and install the windows into them. That way I could see into the other corners of the lounge as well. The next day, I did the same thing with the bathroom. My goal was to turn this room into my crafting area, where I could access a lot of materials and tools at once and craft whatever I wanted. I grabbed some more windows and installed them upstairs. I also didn't like the fact that I couldn't see anything once the gate was closed. So I built windows here as well, but this time I placed barricades on both sides that light could still come through. I built another window on the other side of the entrance too, but the light wasn't strong enough to illuminate the hallway. I returned home to my animals and petted them. My next goal was to bring them to the stadium as well. I bet they would enjoy all the extra space there. I filled my bags with the things I was still missing at the stadium, like medical and cooking supplies. That night, I went to bed at the fire department. On day 74, I continued packing things to take with me to the stadium. I had to make several trips to transport everything, but I brought extra clothing, weapons, medical supplies, food, tools and materials with me. I also switched jackets again. I was now wearing a military jacket with much better protective stats. I brought everything upstairs and sorted it into the crates. Then I wanted to drive back to the forest to cut down more trees, when I realized that there was also a few trees growing right next to the stadium. I cut down a few of them before hearing a zed. It seemed like at least a few of them were still hiding inside the houses. I brought the logs inside and drove back to the fire department to grab more supplies. I brought everything upstairs again, sorted it, and then went to bed. The next morning, I started building a fence to separate the entrance from the field. I wanted to bring my animals onto the field, but I didn't have enough logs, so I had to go back to the school and cut down some more trees. I built a fence and left myself enough space to turn my car around in the entrance. Then I built a chicken coop and marked it as its own enclosure. After that, I went to bed fairly early. I was exhausted. I needed a lot more wood for everything, so I drove back to the forest near the large fire department and cut down more trees. And since the first fence was finished, I decided that I could start moving my animals. I attached the trailer to my car and parked it in front of the garage. Since I still had some space left in the trunk, I grabbed some books as well. I put a cow, a pig and 2 chickens into the trailer and drove to the stadium. This time I was extra careful. I managed not to hit anything, but I could hear the animals screaming as I drove past the Zeds. At first I tried to drive the trailer inside the stadium, but it was too big. I almost got stuck. Luckily, I managed to free myself and bring the animals from the trailer onto the field. I added a new animal zone and brought them inside. I felt bad because it was raining so heavily, so I built a hutch and some froth for at least water for now. Then I drove back and brought the rest of the animals with me. I also grabbed the M16 and some ammunition for it. On the way back to the stadium, I was worried about the bull. Males tend to become aggressive and they are stressed. But I thought our bond was strong enough by now, so hopefully he wouldn't attack me. I brought everyone inside and went to bed. The rain continued the next day, and I could hear my animals getting stressed because of it. So I looked around and extended the roof over one of the player cabins. I also added 2 poles, just for the looks of it. Next, I built a froth for food, and it didn't take long until the animals noticed the roof and come over to it. Working in the rain left me soaked, so I wrung out my clothes and continued building the fence. Then the rain finally stopped. I took the opportunity to build a small throw inside the chicken coop for their food. Then I skied some grass and added it through the throws. Then I sat down on my couch and opened another beer. I relaxed for the rest of the evening before going to bed. I really enjoyed sitting inside while it was raining outside. On day 78, the rain finally stopped. I wanted to drive back to the fire department, but then I noticed that I had attracted a large group of Zeds to the street I'd been driving along all the time. And this time they had got pretty close to my villa, so I dealt with the group. I drove back and packed more stuff into my trunk. I went through every crate once again to check if I had missed anything. But no, it seemed like most of the important stuff was already at my new base. I cut down some more trees before driving back to the stadium. The streets were getting more crowded with every trip. I built more of the fence. I wanted to create a large enclosure for the animals and use the other half of the stadium for fields and crops. And I think this amount of space was definitely enough for my cows and pigs. I still didn't have enough wood to finish the fence. But okay. I cooked dinner in the evening and rested on my bed until it was late enough to go to sleep. Then I realized that I had left a mop at the fire department. And without a mop, I couldn't clean the hutch. So I had to drive back once again, but not without killing some more Zeds. I think a part of me actually missed killing Zeds after a few days without it. I returned home, grabbed the mop and also took all the guns I still had left behind. Even though I didn't have any ammunition for them, I wanted them at my stadium. I drove back to the forest and cut down a lot more trees. I really wanted to finish this fence. On my way back, I parked in front of the other fire department truck and finally replaced the windshield and the hood. My truck had been with me for a long time now and I didn't want to lose it. But my mechanics level still wasn't high enough to avoid problems with some of the parts. And since some of the other parts at the car weren't looking too good either, I decided to take the entire car with me and replace the parts later. I drove back to the stadium, parked both cars in my parking lot and sorted my guns upstairs. Then I continued building the fence with the logs I had collected. And it still wasn't enough. But okay, it was only one more trip to the forest. I went to bed. On day 80, I woke up early from a nightmare. I used the extra time to reorganize some of my loot. I also moved some furniture from the bathroom to the other. I wanted to finish the crafting area. Sitting on the chair allowed me to access every crate around me. And with the light from the window and the table, I could craft pretty much everything right here. Arranging everything took almost the entire day. In the evening, I went back to the cars and replaced some parts that I could uninstall and install with my current mechanics level, mainly tires and light bulbs. I had some problems with parts like the doors, for example, but I managed to get everything done and went to bed early again. I was very tired. It was day 81. After waking up and having some breakfast, I drove back to the houses and picked up a bed. Now that I had reached carpentry level 10, I could move furniture without risking that parts would break. I didn't like the small bed in the corner, and overall I wasn't happy with how the room looked. Time for a makeover. I placed a new bed and rearranged some more furniture before driving back to the forest. I needed more wood. On the way there, I stumbled across a Range Rover. Definitely a car for later. I cut down a few trees, returned home, sawed the logs into planks and finished the fence first. Then I carried the planks upstairs and started building walls to create separate rooms for storage and sleeping. I rearranged the cupboards once again before going to bed. The next morning, the work continued. I kept building the walls, but natural light quickly became a problem. So I tore down a part of the wall and replaced it with a window frame instead. I was running out of wood again, but the rooms were finally starting to take shape. I hung up a few paintings and moved my book collection into the bookshelves. I also cleaned up my driveway and reinstalled the damaged parts on the second fire truck. Then I realized that my cow was finally producing milk. I could milk her. The info panel said she wasn't pregnant, but I wasn't going to complain. Milk can be turned into butter, and butter is one of the easiest ways to eat enough calories without constantly losing weight. I cooked dinner in the evening, even reached another cooking level, washed myself and felt really proud of how far the stadium had come. I spent the rest of the evening reading before going to bed. I was still missing a few doors, so I went back to cutting down trees. I didn't need much wood this time, so I drove to the school and chopped down the trees there. A few Zeds came wandering out of the woods, but they weren't going to stop me. I built the doors and used the remaining logs to create another crafting area. This one would be dedicated to workstation, especially blacksmithing and butchering. By now, I had already spent quite a bit of time in previous runs working on blacksmithing, and in this run, I collected plenty of tools and materials to finally get started. To begin forging, you first have to combine several crafting skills. Pottery and masonry are essential. Carving and knapping also helps if you don't already have the right tools. For both the forge and the furnace, you need stone, and the easiest way to get stone is by breaking large stones into smaller ones. 30 stones for the forge, 40 for the furnace. I remembered seeing plenty of large stones near the school, so I headed back there. Large stones are also required to craft stone wheels, and those are needed for pottery wheel. You will need a pottery wheel to craft a crucible, and with the crucible you can melt iron and eventually craft an anvil. That night, I woke up from a nightmare, so I used the extra time to craft stone wheels and build the pottery wheel. I also carried the clay downstairs before driving back to the forest to collect more stones. On the way back home, I stopped at the fire department to pick up the generator and the stone block I had left there. There was a gas station near the stadium where I wanted to place the generator. But first, I had to deal with a bunch of Zeds. I connected the generator and drove back home. Then I started crafting stone blocks and gained another masonry level. Since I was about to craft a lot more stone blocks, I decided to read the next masonry book to get the most experience possible. I petted my animals and reached another level in animal care. I was really making progress. I sat down and spent the rest of the day reading, cooked a few fresh soups and then continued reading. I didn't want to finish the whole book just yet. Only enough to hopefully reach the next experience multiplier. On day 85, I woke up with a new hairstyle again. The 4th time now. I started making stone blocks, and with the very last stone, I actually reached masonry level 6, so stopping halfway through the book had been the perfect decision. I placed a coal pile so I could produce coal later, and collected some grass to make clay and concrete. Apparently though, the 10 liters of water in my paint bucket weren't good enough for the recipe, so I transferred the water into another bucket, and now it worked. I crafted a wooden mold for the anvil and used it to shape a ceramic mold. Then I burned some branches to make charcoal and fired the mold. With enough iron, I would finally be able to cast an anvil. For the better forge, you don't only need an anvil, you also need a large wooden bucket. Normally, you would first have to forge the iron bands in a primitive forge. But there's another way: dismantling car racks. Car racks provides enough scrap iron to smelt later, and they can also give you the iron bands needed for the bucket. Luckily for me, there were plenty of racks nearby. Then I checked out the van I had spotted earlier while clearing the stadium, and I found a second sledgehammer. Wow! Remember when I told you that these vans can spawn in with a sledgehammer? This is exactly why. I drove the iron back to the furnace and then went to bed. The next day, I drove back to the place where I'd been cutting down trees. All these branches and saplings were still laying on the ground, and I needed them to make charcoal for smelting the iron. I also gathered branches from the trees growing around my driveway. You need 2 crucibles to cast an anvil, because one can only have 20 units of molten iron. After smelting enough iron, I was finally able to cast the anvil. Now I was only missing the bucket, and a bit of wood for it. I crafted the bucket and finally placed the forge. It's a shame that you can't rotate the forge, but oh well. I grabbed another shelf and a chair. Now I could access both the furnace and the forge while sitting in one place. I started crafting some of the tools I was still missing and gained 2 blacksmithing levels. In the evening, I cooked another soup and went to bed. The next morning, I repaired the hood and the trunk of my fire truck before driving over the Range Rover to tow it back to my base. I checked its condition, and I was a little disappointed. It wasn't in a very good shape, but that was something to deal with later. My plan for today was to visit the large warehouse in Louisville that I hadn't looted yet. It was located in the northwest of the city, which meant driving straight through downtown. And downtown was still heavily infested. I arrived at the warehouse, drove a lap around the building and dealt with the Zeds outside. Then I broke in and opened the garage doors to let some light inside. This place had everything. Tools, materials, food. There were even shelves filled entirely with propane tanks. I searched every shelf before driving back home. I sorted all the loot and placed the toys I had collected in my bedroom. I also found a lot of jars and sheet metal. I went to bed after sorting everything. The jars had already gone stale, so I cooked a few fresh soups and poured the rest onto the ground. After cooking, I went out to the driveway and used the gravel bags I'd found in the warehouse. I thought I was being clever by placing the gravel in a chessboard pattern and removing the dirt in between, hoping that bushes and trees wouldn't grow there anymore. But unfortunately, that didn't work. I drove to the gas station to refuel my truck, but noted that a lot of Zeds had returned. And at this point, I never say no to a fight. After refueling, I parked next to the police car that I wanted to check out. Once the Zeds were dealt with, I found some ammunition inside. And then I thought I might as well visit the army supply store again. I had a feeling that I hadn't searched every room yet. Of course, that meant fighting another large group of Zeds. And for the first time in over a month, I actually ran out of breath. I was feeling alive again. I sat down in my truck to recover. While I was waiting, I used the opportunity to lure the Zeds away from the parking lot by driving around in circles once again. Inside the store, I was a little disappointed. The only thing I found was more 5.56 ammunition for my M16. The real problem with the M16 wasn't the ammo. It was the magazines. 2 magazines just weren't enough. I really needed more. But since I was already here, I grabbed enough 5.56 to make a package and also took a crate with me. On the drive home, I was shocked by how many Zeds were still running through the streets. And the worst part, they were practically around the corner from the stadium. I just hoped they wouldn't become a problem later. In the evening, I petted my animals, milked my cow and made some butter. Then I read the next cooking book before going to bed. On day 89, it started raining again, so I continued reading. At noon, I turned on the radio to listen to the weather forecast. The rain would continue through tomorrow as well, so I simply stayed inside all day and kept reading. I cooked dinner in the evening and then went to bed. The next day, I listened to the weather forecast once again. Clear skies tomorrow. Perfect. Since I already know it would rain all day, I sat down on my couch and read the next animal care book. In the evening, I petted my animals, baked some bread and then went to bed. I had survived for 3 months in Louisville. I grabbed my M16 and drove to the road near my old villa. I wanted to finally clear the street that I had been driving alone so many times. Or at least part of it. And what better opportunity to use the M16? I switched to semi-automatic, and the shooting began. But having only 2 magazines quickly became a drawback. I constantly had to retreat to my truck, reload, and then return to the fight. I also had my pistol with me, which came in handy whenever the M16 magazines went dry. But after fighting for an entire morning, I was slowly getting annoyed by the endless number of sets. So I drove through the forest where I had cut down so many trees back then when I was living at the fire department, and collected a large pile of branches and saplings. I was going to need a lot of charcoal in the long run. On my way back, I dealt with a few more stragglers before realizing that there had been a survivor home here the entire time. I marked it on my map and kept driving. It was already getting late. The house wasn't going anywhere. I also stopped by one of the furniture stores because I spotted an antique oven. I unloaded the branches at my charcoal pile, placed the oven in my kitchen, and went to bed. Day 92 started with breakfast. Then I drove to the survivor home I had discovered the day before. Inside, I found another carbine, more ammunition and some extra food. After that, I returned to the road and continued clearing more sets. I kept driving until I reached the shopping district again. Today, I finally wanted to loot the Gigamarkt for the first time in this run. Thanks to all the survivor homes, I already had plenty of food. But there is never enough food. So I loot the sets away from the entrance and deep with the few that stayed behind. Then I went inside, and this place was huge. Just like the large warehouse I had looted a few days earlier, it had a bit of everything. Mostly food, of course. But today I also learned that the Gigamarts apparently have a small hardware section. Good to know. I searched both storage rooms before returning to my truck and driving home. It was already late by the time I arrived. I sorted the loot from my first backpack and called it a day. The next morning, I unloaded the rest of my trunk into my storage crates. I also started making better use of my storage room by moving all my candy and boxes of canned food into it. While organizing everything, I noticed that I had somehow forgotten to build one section of wall. So I fixed that. Then I made some charcoal and brought it to the furnace. Using all the iron I had collected, I forged large number of quarter bars. Most of them were turned into small knives. Sharpening those knives on the grindstone is actually a great way to level maintenance quickly. Then I simply melted them back down into iron chunks without losing any material. I petted my animals, sat down to read for a while, and then went to bed. Once again, I started the day by preparing some food. Then I sat down to read. A few days earlier, I had found the Aiming Volume 3 book in the One Survivor home. Reading it took almost the entire day. By the evening, I petted my animals, milked my cow and turned the milk into butter. I also grabbed a couch from the room next door and crafted myself a pair of scrap metal gloves. I honestly can't believe it took me this long to make them. I use one of my own mods where I have adjusted the stats of several items, especially the discomfort value of armor. Then I went to bed. My plan for the next day was actually to drive back to the road and continue clearing it. But before I could even leave, I noticed that a group of Zeds had wandered from downtown toward my stadium. Then I started shooting, though I only made things worse. I was quickly pushed back, and I had to lure most of them away again. Apparently, the Zeds inside one of the nearby apartment buildings had only spawned in now. And that wasn't all. More Zeds were coming from the other side as well. After dealing with the smaller horde, I returned to the apartment building and used my horn to lure even more of them outside. I drove around the stadium several times, killing every straggler I came across. I even reached aiming level 5. It really felt like Zeds were slowly returning to the areas I had already cleared. But my biggest concern was still the apartment building. I switched back to the baseball bat and dealt with the remaining Zeds outside. Since I still had plenty of ammunition left, I drove back to the road and continued my work there. Just me, killing Zeds all day long. When it got late, I returned to the stadium and checked the apartment building once more. It looked clear. That evening, I ate far too much candy, brewed myself a coffee, and then went to bed. On day 96, I decided to visit the last survivor home I still had marked on my map. Not because I really needed anything anymore, just for the sake of completing it. If I counted correctly, I had looted 13 survivor homes in Louisville. I returned home, sorted my loot, and started repairing the Range Rover. The old fire truck had served me well as a donor vehicle, and I was able to swap over several useful parts. I also grabbed some sheet metal and iron pipes to craft armor for the windows. After filling the tanks with a little fuel, I drove over to the gas station. Then it was time for bed. Heavy rain started pouring down, but that wasn't going to stop me from working on the Range Rover. Neither its engine nor the one from the fire truck was in particular good condition, so I drove over to the stadium parking lot and removed the engine parts from the cars there. That's when I realized that I needed mechanics level 5 before I could actually repair the engine, so I spent the rest of the day sitting inside and reading the Mechanics Volume 3 book. Thanks to one of my mods, leveling mechanics would be much easier once I finished the book. On day 98, I trained my mechanics skill to level 5, so I could finally repair engines. After dealing with a few more Zeds, I repaired the engine of the Range Rover. I also wanted to add more armor to it, so I drove back to the nearby houses and dismantled a few bathtubs. A great source of iron pipes. Back at the stadium, I installed armor on the windshield and the remaining front window. I petted my animals, spent the rest of the evening reading, and then went to bed. There were only 2 days left in this series, and somehow I felt the urge to visit a few more farms. Maybe I could find some sheep. Unfortunately, the rain just wouldn't stop. But a chance of snowfall? What? I took the Range Rover and was about to hook up the trailer when I noticed another group of Zeds gathering around the apartment building. I defeated them and even reached maintenance level 8. Then I attached the trailer and drove south, past my old fire department and toward the farms. The very first farm I came across had a large market. And cheap. Perfect. I killed the Zeds, loaded the sheep into the trailer and drove them back to my stadium. The females were no problem. The male, not so much. That little a-hole broke through 2 fences and even attacked me. Well, he had to go. My first injury of this entire run. I repaired the fence, butchered the ram and made use of every single part. I prepared the leather to dry, built a drying rack and hang it up. Then I cooked several stir fries with the mutton before heading to bed. Day 100 began by changing the bandage on my forearm. Then I grabbed my sledgehammer. It was finally time to deal with the Zeds trapped inside the walls on the 2nd floor. I had no idea how many were hidden in there, so I broke through the wall and went in. After clearing one side, I repeated the process on the other. I took a short break, then I finished the last of them. The stadium was finally 100% cleared. To celebrate the end of this journey, I baked a pie, with lots of chocolate. Then I made some pancakes, also with a lot of chocolate. I sliced the pie and placed a table with a few chairs in the middle of my room. Sitting down was somehow more difficult than it should have been. But eventually everything was ready. I placed the food on the table and hey, where did the other half of my pie go? As I enjoyed my meal, I just wanted to say thank you for watching this series. If you have made it all the way to this point, I would really appreciate it if you left a like and subscribe to the channel. There will definitely be more Project Zomboid content. And now that Build 42 Stable has finally been released, I truly believe we are experiencing the best version of Project Zomboid yet. I had an incredible time recording and editing the series. Conquering the baseball stadium had been one of my biggest goals in Project Zomboid, and thanks to the series, I finally achieved it. I wish you all the best luck out there. Take care. And always remember, this is not the story how you died, this is the story how you lived. See you all on the next run.